Hi, my name's Anita Sanchez. Welcome to Pine Hollow's 10-minute field trips. We're going to be exploring nature and taking field trips in some places you might not expect. So come along and explore. Today we're going to take a field trip to my driveway, which is not paved. It's dirt and gravel, as you can see, and down at the bottom of the hill it gets very, very muddy. Now, people have always said, well, you should blacktop your driveway and then you won't have all these horrible mud puddles. But I actually kind of like mud. It's true, mud can get your feet muddy and dirty, but mud can be a really important habitat for lots of different living creatures. So let's figure out why mud is so important. Now, what is mud anyway? Mud isn't just dirt. Dirt is something that you don't want, that you clean up when your house gets dirty. Mud is soil, which is what plants grow in, and when the soil gets wet, we call it mud. But all that moisture, all that wetness that came from the rain and is held in the mud is really good for the plants. They couldn't live without it. It's really good for plants, and this mud is also really good for some types of animals. Here's one of the creatures that loves mud, an earthworm. Earthworms like to be wet. In fact, they need to be wet. They need to have their bodies stay moist so that they can breathe. Molecules of oxygen will go through the wet, slimy covering that's on their bodies and go into their bodies so that they can breathe. So they need to be wet. If they dry out, they'll die. So they love wet, muddy areas like this. They don't want to be completely underwater. They can drown if they get too far under the water, so they don't want to be inside the puddle. They just want to hang out in the mud nearby. Now, worms are really good food, not for people, but for a special kind of bird that we see a lot in the springtime. Let's take a look at one of my favorite birds, the American robin. Now, I'm sure you guys have seen this around in the yard. Usually they come in spring and they pull worms out of the grass. So if we didn't have nice muddy areas where worms can live, we wouldn't have as many robins. The robins wouldn't be able to get food for their babies. But the robins use mud for something else too. If you're a robin making a nest, you need dry grass. So robins will fly down to a place where there's some dry grass and use their beaks to grab some dry grass, nice and soft. This would make a nice warm nest for their young, but it's not going to hold together. How are you going to hold your nest together if it's just made out of grass? You need something like glue that will hold the dry grass together. So here's where the mud comes in. The robin will fly down and grab a beakful of mud. Ugh, it might seem yucky to take a mouthful of mud, but it's sticky, it's gluey, and when it dries, it will be really hard, almost like cement. Now here's something really exciting I found in a tangle of bushes in my backyard. During the summer, I wouldn't have been able to see this because the leaves would hide this from me. But it's early in the spring now, the leaves aren't out yet. And there, that's last year's nest. The robin won't use this again. This is last year's nest, so it's been there a year. You can see it's kind of beat up. The robin won't be coming back. The robins, the male and female robin, will work to build a new nest, maybe even in this same bush. But you can see that what they used to build their nest, last year's nest, is dried grass cemented together with mud. Look at that. It's almost like a clay pot. It's really hard. The mud hardened into a cement that makes a strong, warm, safe nest for the babies. So without the mud, the robins couldn't build a nest. Fortunately, my backyard is nice and muddy, so they have plenty of muddy areas to choose from to find their mud. But if the robin's trying to build a nest in an area where the driveways are all black-topped and the lawn is all really nice and neat, and there's no mud, then the robin's out of luck. So next time you see a muddy area, wear some old shoes. You might want to just squelch on through. Think about the robins that are using the mud to build their nest. Take a look in the mud. Maybe dig around a little. See if you can find something nice and wet and slimy like this worm. And then take a minute to listen to the sounds of the birds. Can you hear those birds singing? Lots of birds besides robins will use worms for food for their babies. True, birds do eat bird seed and other things like that, but particularly in the spring when they're nesting, they use worms to feed their babies because worms are, believe it or not, very good food. They're high in protein, so they're really good food for baby birds. So without mud, not as many worms, not as many robins, not as many birds. Thanks for exploring the mud with me. See you next time.